Hello, online folks. Just wanted to give you a quick heads up. We'll probably be starting about 5 minutes late, give or take. We'll keep it muted here in the boardroom until that time, but be aware we are live streaming.
10 miles.
It's 1:06 on Tuesday, October 4th, 2022. I'm calling to order the special budget ad hoc committee.
Ocho's here.
We have roll call, please.
Bates,
Bates here.
Leonard,
Leonard here.
Pepe,
Pepe here.
Surges, Pirog, Berman.
Herman here. We have no minutes to approve. To the best of my knowledge, there's no public comments unless there's someone online. All right. Item number 4, our presentation and discussion are.
Mr. Chairman, Mike, please.
My mic is on. Can you, is that better? All right, I'm sorry.
Much better. Thank you.
Much better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fiscal year 23 general fund budget, Mr. Hansick.
Okay, I think it's on. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I apologize for being late. I did prepare a presentation for you. It's basically the very same one I've been using. I just updated some of the figures for you, and there's a couple of new slides in there as well. But so I'll just run through just a couple of changes and be as brief as possible so that you could spend the rest of the time in discussion. So this is a list of changes. They're really somewhat minor. We found out that there will be a reduction in revenue from the supervisor of assessments office by $19,000 due to the elimination of DevNet access revenue. A certain company had been accessing the information in their computer system, and I guess that's no longer going to be the case. And so we'll lose that revenue stream, but that was only 19,000. In doing our reconciliations, we realized that there were a couple of internal transfers in which the information technology department bills other of the special revenue funds within the county for the services provided to them. And there were 2 of the internal transfers that had been missed and were not included in the revenue for the general fund. And so we added those, and that increased the revenue by $96,000. The state's attorney's office, we learned from Mr. Hunt that they do have 2 grants, and the amount of the revenue coming in fiscal year 23 would be $133,000 for the state's attorney's office ARPA grant and $347,000 from the SAM HSA grant. And so those, of course, had expenses along with them of $478,000. So it really didn't change anything in the budget, but we just wanted to add both the revenue and the expense to incorporate that. Then we added those 2 grant funded positions to the list of new non-safety act positions. And I highlighted them in green on the list of positions so that you could be a way to identify them as being grant funded. Also in our ongoing reconciliations, we discovered that one of the bailiff positions that had been listed on the Safety Act position list actually had nothing to do with Safety Act. So we removed that from that list. It didn't change the budget. It's just not on that specific list. Then I was asked to increase the equity adjustment that we had been using from 700,000 to 900,000 as a result of a meeting that had taken place. Then all of those changes ended up increasing the deficit by almost $150,000. And then within the list of new personnel, there were a couple of health insurance costs that needed to be updated. It didn't change the budget, it just changed the information on the list. So again, it only increased, well, all of these changes combined increased it by $150,000. This is the same slide, just updated with the number of positions. And just to remind everyone that we're going to be holding the Safety Act, the new positions for Safety Act and non-Safety Act in the contingency. And here's the total deficit of 16,486,000. And each additional percent of non-union increases adds $357,700 to the deficit. Right now, it's including a 3% non-union increase with a $900,000 department equity adjustment. Okay, and then this is the same deficit with it expanded according to category, the same presentation. So I just updated it. So I'm not going to go through all of these because it's all the same slides you've been looking at. I've just updated the figures to reflect those few changes. Let me get to the new slides. Okay, so these updated, I believe one of the health insurance amounts were updated. Again, this is just for the sake of a list, so they're as up to date as they possibly can be. Okay, and here I just updated the number of positions that were referenced, that there's a total of 37 Safety Act personnel and 29 new non-Safety Act personnel, 2 of which are grant funded. The wage increases for the expiring union contracts are not included. There is a 3% non-union wage increase included. The non-union equity adjustment is now at 900,000. And of course, there's no property tax increase yet included in the budget other than the 500,000 for new construction and no sales taxes included. Okay, so this is the same slide for reserves other than I updated the deficit amount to the 16,486,000. Okay.
Go back, please.
Yes.
One back, please. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Joe.
And this is a new slide that I added to kind of give you a little bit more details behind the scenes so that there's no surprises. This is regarding a 5% increase to property tax revenue. We've just been speaking of that in general terms. And so I wanted to kind of lay it out for you what that actually means behind the scenes. So there's a group of, well, there's all of the various property tax levies that we have are listed here. So it's the general fund, the insurance liability fund, the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, the Social Security Fund, the Veterans Commission Fund, and then we have the county highway, county bridge, county highway matching, and county health. So those are all of the county tax levies that when combined, we're allowed to increase up to 5% this year. So I did the calculation in the right-hand column of what the 5% increase looks like. I grouped together that top section of funds where you've got general fund, insurance liability, Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, Social Security, and now Veterans Commission, because what happens is insurance liability, IMRF, FICA, and now the Veterans Commission, their property tax allocations need to be adjusted to balance their budgets. It's at the expense of the general fund. So since those budgets are already now balanced with their share of property tax revenues, what I'm proposing is that the entire 5% of this group of funds would then go, completely to the general fund. So be the $2.5 million that we've been talking about. So it's really the 5% increase on all of those individual tax levies that would be coming back to the general fund. But because the general fund has nothing to do with balancing the county highway, county bridge, county highway matching, and county health funds, I'm proposing that those increases stay within those funds so they have additional funding as a result of the 5% increase. But again, the $2.5 million increase to the general fund is what we've been talking about all along. But you do have the option, if you so choose, to take all of the 5% increases from all of the other funds as well, which is the county highway, county bridge, county highway matching, county health. You could take those and pull them into the general fund as well. That would be your choice. But right now, this presentation is just reflecting the $2.5 million from the general fund group. Okay. And now I've got basically two options, and you can add as many other options as you wish, but right now I'm showing the same deficit in both options, 1 and 2. The top one is option is the option to use the 5% property tax increase, which is at $2.5 million, and then take $4.9 million out of the property tax freeze protection fund, which is almost the entire balance in that fund. And then the balance coming out of the COVID payroll reimbursement fund. So that's option 1. Option 2 would be no property tax increase. And so we would have that same $4.9 million coming out of the property tax freeze protection fund, but we'd have to take more, obviously, out of the COVID payroll reimbursement fund, $11.6 million. So those are two options that I present for you. And then I just left these slides in here for you for your reference about reserves, what is a story on reserves, story on deficit spending, on the slide that I provided for you last time. So that's all still in this presentation, and the concerns about deficit spending. So it's all there for you for a reference and for a basis of discussion. So I can leave it on whatever slide you wish or move according to the discussion. But I'm finished with my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Schimmel,
Joe, the change in the equity adjustment, is that the result of reducing the number of other counties that we're comparing them to and focusing on the larger ones?
I was not included in that meeting. I mean, I know a little bit about it, but I'm probably not the best one to answer questions. I don't know if Jamie is here. She was involved, so I think she could probably better explain that.
Madam Chair, would you?
And I was there, but I'll let Jamie speak to this.
Yes, when we revisited the comparisons, we had been using the study done by McHenry County, which included a pretty wide swath of counties, municipalities, including Kane County in their analysis. Some of the offices and departments had asked that we make a comparison to Lake County, feeling that they were the most comparable. So we did a Lake County comparison, which total cost would have been over $7 million if we were to use only Lake County. So we ran a few different scenarios, and the balance of Lake County, the McHenry County study, and Kane County as an average produced the $9 million per year over 3 years for a total of
900,000.
I'm sorry, 900,000 for 3 years for a total of 2.7 million over the 3-year period. So that is based on an average of Lake, McHenry, and Kane Current.
Thank you. And then I had a follow-up. Joe, have you done a projection of what the union increases would be if they were at the same 3% that we've estimated for non-union?
Got it in there. That's what.
Would it be like the 3% you're saying? No, I'm sorry, I don't have that. I didn't even think to do that, because from what I've been hearing, it sounds like it would be far more than that. So I thought I would prefer to wait until I got more solid information to do those calculations with. But I'd be happy to do that calculation for you.
And that, if I recall, the way that these things usually go is that it takes a long time to come to the contract, but then the wages are made retroactive to the date of expiration. But that could theoretically not be till the next fiscal year, depending on when the contracts are signed.
That's correct, yes. And what we do in terms of our actual expense normally, when we're closing the year, if the contracts still have not been settled and there's retroactive amounts involved, we do try to at least set aside the minimum increase, which like if we decide to give everyone non-union people a 3%, for example, then we would use 3% to set aside to accrue in terms of our financial statements as a minimum amount to have set aside for that. And we would do a budget adjustment along with that. Normally it comes out of reserves or property tax freeze protection fund.
So, I mean, really, the projection of the 16 million is assuming all the other estimates are right on, in which case I'd like you to take over my investments for me. The deficit is actually going to be augmented by whatever the union contract increases are, whether it's now or retroactive.
Yes, that's correct.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you,
Very
Mr.
true.
Chairman.
Other question? Joe, I had, we discussed the veterans, can we go back to the budget and see what was requested by the, by department and see what the veteran,
Actually, they're not included
not,
in the general fund, so they're not here. I mean, they're not in this presentation. If memory serves me correct, I believe, well, actually, if we look at, let's see, we'll go to,
The page that had the veterans on.
yes, okay, so their tax revenue is at 461 right now. So that that is the entire amount of their budget, plus I think roughly $50,000 more that they just recently added, in which they requested that $50,000 be drawn down from their cash on hand
reserve?
in order to fund an additional line item that they were adding to the budget. But right now, their total budget minus that 50,000 is 461. So roughly it's 510,000 is the total.
Madam Chair,
There it's on. Hi. So this is their request for next fiscal year, which I believe is about $150,000 more than than this current fiscal year.
I think so. It may only actually be 135, but yes,
Okay.
that's a rough estimate.
And then they wanted, if we have the 5% increase, they'll get an additional 23,000. And may I ask, do you happen to have off the top of your head how much they have in reserves?
I think it's around 700,000. So they had roughly 2 years worth of expenses built up on reserve. Until now, they've increased their budget significantly, so it's not quite 2 years worth anymore, but it had been up to 2 years worth.
And I know because this is all very fluid right now, I don't mean to ask a lot of questions about this, but just as a good rule of thumb, how much should be in reserves? 6 months, is that prudent? A year? What's
Well,
best practice?
It would depend on the source of revenue. So, and when is the measurement point? So because the only for sure audited balances are those that are available as of November 30th. If you were to look at, and that's the point at which the last measurement was taken of their fund balance was around 700,000. You want to make sure that there's enough to, like in their case, the property tax revenue does not come in until June. And so you need to have enough on hand to get from December all the way through May, which is 6 months. Plus, we'd like to have an additional 2-3 months worth on hand, so that for cash flow purposes as a general rule of thumb, because you don't want them to be down to zero when they get to the property tax revenue. So we generally speaking, so that's a total of 9 months worth,
Okay.
I would say, in their case, and in some of the other cases as well, like the IMRF fund, the FICA fund, any fund that's totally dependent on property tax revenue.
And since we have a variety of different tax levies within our general fund, should we remain at about 9 months worth of in savings for our budget as well?
For the general fund,
The general fund, yes.
I wished I had brought my other notes with me. That sounds about right. I I think so. I think so.
Okay, okay.
And you said how many months?
9
9 months?
months.
Mr. Chair, I think Mr. Surges has his hand up.
Oh, Mr. Surges.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, I'm not there and zooming in. Regarding, I have 3 or 4 items, just conversationally. Regarding the union raises, Joe, I not having gone through this several times, but only the one time, at the last go around, I oftentimes get confused as to when those raises kick in, how they go back retroactively, that sort of thing. But I do think that we should at least come up with the best guess that we can as to what those funds are going to be needed. And I think we should have the ability to do that. Again, not trying to influence, the bargaining agreements at all. But I don't think it's wrong to put together a projected number that of course we'll need to adjust, but just something so that we keep it in our consciousness and don't let it fall off the plate. Secondly, Mr. Shepro, I believe, brought up the Lake County, McHenry County study. I just want to make sure, and I think I understood this because I was in the meeting with Madam Chair and Jamie Labrillo on Friday, that Ken, we did look at that from a myriad of different counties, and then ultimately said, if we just looked at Lake and McHenry, how does that come in? The spread on that for the 1 year was really quite minimal, $150,000 to bring that parity or that equity back up. I just want to make sure that I understood that that's not a front-loaded spread. So like we only say it's only 900,000 the first year, but the second year it's 3 times that. I didn't write that note down, but I want to make sure. And then I also want to make sure that we're all understanding that, I think we're to the point where, maybe we need to be looking at a 0 increment budget. And I don't want, while the equity is important, we need to be able to afford that to go. And I don't want to keep putting that out there as if it's a foregone conclusion assumption. I want to make sure that we're understanding, this budget is really super tight, and using reserves or depleting them. We've not asked for any cuts. We've not asked for anybody to pull anything back yet. And I've yet to see what a 0 increment looks like from last year to this year to be able to begin making some assumptions or some decisions. And again, I would not, this is just me, but when I ask for a 0 increment figures, I'm not including Safety Act funds in those. I'm just, year over year type of comparisons. So I just want to make sure that I was interjecting those.
Joe?
Oh, I'm not sure if this would help, but within the presentation, I mean, if you're looking at 0 increment, I mean, that's exactly what the first column in the department, in this section that's by department. So,
and Joe, I do apologize. I did join the meeting about 6 minutes late, and I apologize about that. So you may have gone over that.
well, no, I did not point that out. It's been part of these presentations. Okay, so the first column is the FY22 budget. So I'm not, what do you mean by 0 increment? We're already increasing revenue by 14.3 million. So there's that. And then.
So wait, go back one slide. Are we saying that? So the 92 million was the 22 budget, the 106, those are requests. How did we jump from this to that?
That's revenue we're looking at there.
This is revenue.
Okay.
And this comes from all of the departments and elected officials inputting their best estimate for revenue coming in, including myself, which is all in there. So that's a compilation of many sources, many different kinds of revenues. And that's what the 106 is. So we've increased revenue by 14.3 million.
Okay, 14.3.
Yeah, and now expenses are going up by 17.6. So when you say zero based, are you saying what do we need to do?
I'm
to bring-
suggesting if there was no change in expenses. So go to the next slide. So this is the expense one, and we're at, so we were at 105 last year,
Budget.
and we would barely clear that for this year without any changes whatsoever. If you're saying 106 is the projected revenue, correct? And for fiscal year 22, so 106 in that second column is projected for 23. Go back to the next slide. We don't even have so the projected barely covers what the 22 budget was.
That's true, because the 22 budget included a large amount of reserves. And I did not include the use of reserves in the budget. So yes, the increase in revenue just barely covers the use of reserves for 2022.
Gotcha.
So yes, you're exactly right.
Okay. And so when I look at the 23 proposal at, whatever that is, 19 million more, is that what that is? 17 million more?
So, yeah.
I don't have my glasses, I'm sorry. 17 million more. That is based on zero changes, just year over year, or is this based on departments and offices asking for additional?
No, this is everything that was asked for, but I mean, I can say with somewhat confidence that it wasn't just by my own staff reviewing everything. There wasn't anything outrageous. It's not like a wish list type thing. The increases, well, let me go back to the by classification. So, I tried to do it segregated out this way. So that increase of 17 million, 900,000 of it, of course, if you start in the right hand is the equity adjustment. Then you've got another 900,000 is a 3% union increase. Now I should have tried to break it out even further, but you've got new positions of 2.1 million and then Safety Act expenses of 3 million. So you've got all those. So that middle column, that 10.8 million, which is a lot. I mean, that's a huge increase. That covers everything else. And by that, it would be health insurance expense. It would be the increase in utilities. It would be inflation. It would be new software contracts in order to support everything that's going on, increases in software maintenance, increases in building maintenance. So there's quite a bit of increase within those individual departments. Some of them are very small, as you can see, like Merit Commission, there's only 2,000. And then there's also, we setting aside $260,000 for the biennial election. So every other year we set that amount. And then if you go back to the previous slide, you can see the sheriff. Well, and then it's the wage increases from the collective bargaining agreements that are already built into this as well. So in those cases where there are union increases or step increases that we know from collective bargaining agreements, that's all built in as well. So I think that middle column is the one that is really the one, if you wanted to peel apart and see, well, what is all of that? That would be the one to focus on. But that is part of what we had hoped would have taken place when each of the departments presented their budgets to the various standing committees. And then the detailed reports were available. They're still available on the finance department website that tells you every single line item and an explanation for every single change within those line items. It's all there. I mean, it'd be thousands of pages to review, but you could pick out significant ones and look at that. But so I shouldn't say anymore. I should let you ask questions.
No, and I thank Joe, and I thank you for that. That helps me dramatically. I look at my colleagues and say, you know, if without a change in revenue and without increasing anything, the natural, I don't know what the right word is, the natural increment seems to be greater than we have available. And at what point do we turn and say, you know, turn back to department and office staff to say, you know, this is the percentage of cuts that we need to begin looking at, and have we taken that step yet?
All right, Mr. Leonard,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'd just like to make 2 points. Mr. Surges, I think the point you're trying to make is we're spending more than we can bring in. I think that's pretty obvious. And I think the problem is when we're looking at a 16.7% increase in expenses, if we don't start cutting our spending, we'll never get enough tax money, no matter what we do, to balance our budget. So, you know, we have a problem here in that we're having to use reserves to balance our budget. But the reality is we have increased spending over last year and this proposed budget for next year by over $30 million. And we can't sustain that kind of increased spending. So that's really the key thing that I think we need to focus on. And I think that's basically what you were implying, Mr. Surges. Is that correct?
Agreed.
Where's the,
Mr.
I'm sorry,
Sanchez,
clarification, where's the $30 million? Where's your calculation on that? What number?
Yeah.
Well, the expenses
Can't hear
this year are.
do not hear you.
Oh,
Hear
my
you.
apologies. I just wanted, if you can just show us on what line items are you taking a look at? Are you taking a look at the 22 budget by category total of expenditures 105 versus the 123 projected? How do you come up with the 30,000 more?
2 years. This is 1 year.
Oh, I'm just talking about next year.
I'm talking about the
No,
last 2
the
years.
following. year.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And so we've got to curtail our spending or control it in some way. And, you know, that really is a concern that if we don't address the spending, it doesn't matter if we get property tax increases, sales tax revenue approved, it won't cover our increases because at a rate of 16 million a year, you just can't sustain that.
If I may,
Madam Chair,
thank you very much. So according to a summary that was presented to us some time ago, and we were still talking about the potential of a countywide sales tax, just so we have the numbers accurate. A property tax at CPI right now will bring $2.5 million in. If it had been passed, or if we agreed to have it, if potentially passed by the voters, that could have brought in $6.5 million, meaning we can double that for a full year, which is 13 million. And then whatever the property tax would be. So that would bring about $15 million worth, give or take, estimate, worth of additional revenue coming in for a full year.
Could you redefine that? Because the property tax increase would equate to a $2.5 million.
That's
increase
correct.
for
I've
the
got
year.
that
This
number.
year.
Right.
Correct. That's
Where
exactly.
is the other?
The sales tax, that would be the, if the
Oh, if we did the
countywide sales
referendum?
tax.
Yeah.
Correct.
But that isn't on the ballot. So, you know,
No, that was
we
chosen
really
not to do
can't,
that. So we're
Hmm.
specifically, we're talking about this year because it had been suggested, and I think we should carefully consider that for the new board, if they would like to take a look at the countywide sales tax again and issue that for the upcoming April election. And it's an opportunity for the new board.
yes, and I'm in full agreement with that. If the new board decides they want to put it on the ballot, that's fine. Ideally, my thought is I would rather give the public, the taxpayers, the right to decide whether or not we deserve a tax increase or not, rather than have the board approve a property tax increase right now after receiving 196 million over the last 30 months. The taxpayers are not going to be in favor of a sales tax referendum unless they feel that there's a true need. And when you look at the numbers, I think the general perception is with 196 million over the last 30 months, we really can't justify a property tax increase and a sales tax revenue increase. Although if the public would vote for that, obviously I'd be all for that.
Obviously, but if I may, sir, we keep on talking about the CARES Act money and the ARPA money, which is restricted funding, not for our general use. So if we can pull that money aside, because that is not for the county to use at its full discretion. The CARES Act money was given to small businesses, to local government agencies as a way of COVID relief. We all know that. There are additional expenses coming from us because of a lack of revenue, which was issued to us by the federal government to make up for those arrears. So we have that money, and that money is now to be used. A very small element of it.
Sanchez first.
Thank you, Chairman Berman. I'm not actually on this committee, so I might have missed an email or something. I'm just trying to ascertain what the goals of this meeting are specifically. Is it to determine if we want to do a property tax? Is it to determine if we are going to cut something from the budget? I think Mr. Onsi made a good point in that as we went through the budget process, the presentations were given to committees. That would have been the place really to start looking at that one column of FY23 other changes where the biggest draw on our expenditures is coming from. So again, if maybe you can answer that, or maybe we're determining that as we go, what the goals are of this meeting.
Well, I think the ad hoc committee's goals, first of all, is to review the budget, make sure everything's included and we all understand what is included. And then determine what is the way we're going to recommend to the full board as to how we're going to get revenue to cover that budget. So I think that's our agenda. And I think that's what we're working towards. I don't know if you have other.
I guess I understood that generally, but more specifically, what are the tactics that we are looking at employing or recommending? Because if we're going to try and cut something from the budget, is that possible to do in this meeting? Or, I mean, are we going to recommend to the?
I would say that would be an outcome of the at the end of our meeting, depending on, if we're saying we cannot generate the revenue to cover the budget, then we're gonna have to recommend something else, something different. So whether, Mr. Bates.
Thank you. I would like to corroborate what Madam Chair already said. Please stop referring to the $196 million as a pot of gold that we can put into our, what I call the pothole fund, the general fund that is just everyday managing of our budget and of our county, which has not been managed very well over the many years preceding us. This is not our money. The $196 million is for specific purposes relating to ARPA and the CARES Act. It's not our money. We can't dip into it like a piggy bank, Mr. Leonard, whom I love dearly. And I also want to say that our budgets are already tight. The thought that we can find $16 million to cut, it's not a realistic, it's not a plan. It's really not, it's kicking the can down the road. It's a non-decision. So as I see it, we have to either make cuts or find more revenue. And I don't think we can make the cuts. I think we have to find new revenue.
All right. I'm sorry. Several.
I guess I'm sort of baffled by this discussion. Yes, first up, yes, the ARPA is not our money in the sense it's a piggy bank, but the purpose of intent, as I understand the federal legislation, is that it is for local governments to mitigate the impact of COVID. So it's not like we have to give it all to somebody else. It is available. I get that we can't do everything all at once, but it's being advocated that I guess, take the 5%. The 5% isn't going to solve the budget problem. It's $2.5 million out of a $16 million deficit. We were presented saying there's two choices. There's no third choice that says cuts. Okay, maybe there aren't $16 million of cuts, but as far as I could tell, there are no cuts. There were no cuts last year. There are no cuts this year proposed for anything. Is that really true? And I guess the thing that I find the most disturbing in terms of looking at the numbers, we don't even know what the Safety Act is really going to be. But it seems to me that we know what our payroll is. And we know that the wages are not going to go down. They're going to go up. And given the numbers, it seems to me that you could, at a minimum, say 3% of the payroll. And I'm going to ask Mr. Leonard to help me with this. That's got to be a big number. And it's a knowable number.
Mhm.
What is our payroll
Well,
for
the
the
total,
union?
total payroll is 62 million right now,
And how much of that is non-union? And how much
maybe
is?
half.
Okay, so if we have, say, 30 million in union payroll and
3%, about $1 million.
yeah, so that would be $1 million, $1.8 million. And if it's double that, that seems to me that number has to be added to our projections, or we're just kidding ourselves. And I guess the timing is a matter of question, but still, it's like when we talk about the 2 years, 3 years for pay equity or for the Safety Act, you've got to take more than I think a 12-month view of what all this is going to be, and not just focus on whether in one fell swoop you can balance the budget with tax increases or anything else, because it's not going to happen that way.
So
Leonard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I agree with what Mr. Shepro is saying, and I understand what Ms. Bates is saying too, and I'm not arguing the point with her. What I'm saying is there's only so much more revenue we can find. I mean, it's limited. So the reality is we really can't find enough revenue to handle the increase in spending we're doing. My suggestion, and it's not a good suggestion, but it's a realistic one, we're really up against the 11th hour now. Yeah, 12th hour, pretty close. Well, 11th month of the year. We got one more to go. But anyhow, I think if we take a look at this proposed budget and the expenses, there are a few little areas where I think we could cut some expenses. You know, I was looking at the non-Safety Act new hires. There's 29 people there. If we didn't do equity raises and didn't hire an additional 29 people, I'm not talking about replacing people, just in those two areas, we would save about $3 million off the budget. So instead of 16.5, we'd be at about 13.5. Unfortunately, since we don't have the ability to increase revenue at this point, unless we pass a property tax increase, which if the board agrees to that, I respect that. I don't agree with it, but I do respect it. I'm just worried that if a property tax increase is approved, the public will not be in favor of a sales tax increase. And quite honestly, the 0.5% sales tax increase that Madam Chair had proposed would generate $26 million a year when it's in full effect. That is what we're going to need down the road in order to balance the budget. But ultimately, I guess my point is this. I think we can make a couple small cuts to what we're proposing here, come in at a budget where we're over by maybe 13, 14 million, use the reserves. And then I think, as we had talked last year, we need to get working on the 24 budget as soon as year 23 starts. And one nice thing that I think we're going to have is we're going to have another decent audit from 22. We're going to see somewhere between 13 and $15 million in excess between revenue and expenses, generally revenues, that if we could, I would like to put into a cash reserve in the general fund to help balance 24. Is it a perfect solution? No. Is it workable? I think it is. But what I would suggest is that we look at maybe trying to pare down a few expenses right now. We don't have much time to really go over this anymore. Propose a budget to the Finance Committee on Friday and then to the board next week.
Madam Chair,
Oh, thank you. I'm just going to do a quick little math equation as well, if I may. So hopefully everybody can stay with me on this. So we have $16 million deficit. We have a property tax increase, which will bring in 2.5 million, reducing that deficit to 13.5 million. We've got approximately
14 million, 16.5 to
13.5.
13.5. So we have approximately $5 million in expenses for the Safety Act, give or take. It's in that range. That money is going to be put on hold. We're going to hold back and remember that there's going to be some trailer bills that are going to be initiated with that as well. One of them may include revenue that the county board can address if it so chooses. But we won't know about that until or perhaps in January, if that gets passed. And that'll again be up to the new board if that potential opportunity would, if they would like to approve that for the revenue. Which leaves, if we put that 5 million, we're talking about an $8.5 million deficit. Hard money that we're talking about right now. That's about it. Now, I asked the other day if we could have an $8 million conversation about reducing the budget by 8 million. I've already talked to the sheriff, and he has agreed that he would be interested in entertaining a budget cut. Well, we've also talked about some other opportunities which are still very fluid, which may bring in some additional revenue from the sheriff. But those are fluid conversations that we're going to have. So that is very much going to be on the table as we go forward for next year. So let's say we can reduce that by about another 2. We're at about 6. And I would say from that, we can certainly bring that forward, knowing that we've got this $5 million that we don't know what it's going to be for the Safety Act, how we're going to pay for it, what it's actually going to need. They may only need 2 million. We don't know. We truly don't know. So I'd like for clarification to pull that out and really start taking a look at, we agree that we could come up with an easy $2 million. We've got the remaining that we could pull out then from our savings and put that forward towards the budget and then allocate it appropriately as we go into 23, 24 for the 24 budget. So I don't think that we need to take a look at this budget as being, yes, it's incredibly serious, incredibly meaningful. But to start talking about reducing equity increases and not having that for our employees, I think that's going to have a much longer lasting impact for us than we even think that we should have. There's going to be people who will leave. And the cost of training and putting in new individuals into those positions to have them leave in a market that is very fluid right now, I think it's incredibly short-sighted.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Tepe.
Mr. Chair, Tepe here. I've been uncharacteristically silent for a while and
It's about to change.
that's about to change. Okay. One of the things that I've repeated on several occasions is the problem that I feel that this board has continued to kick the can down the road. Okay. You're probably getting tired of hearing that, but as long as I'm still on the board, I guess I'll repeat it. And what bothers me about that is everybody's afraid to talk about raising the property taxes, even though they're only 1/6 of our total budget. But yet at the Forest Preserve meeting just, a few weeks ago, Mr. Leonard said, oh, that particular increase for the PTEL, that's fine. That's only a few dollars. And when I proposed it a year ago and it was only a few dollars, it was a terrible thing to talk about. So I will say that one, we continue to kick the can down the road. Second, I think Mr. Onset has done a better job in anticipating revenues for this upcoming year than in the past. I think the unknowns associated with that will narrow the amount. So sitting out there and saying, gee, we get more revenue and we get less expenses, so balancing the budget by using reserves is okay to do, really bothers me. Particularly when that budget, that reserve amount that we're planning on using is 16.5 million. So, Mr. Onsick, would you bring up slide number 20 of your report, or start slide number 14 of your report?
Sure where the slide numbers would be, but.
This
wh-
is
what
the
is the topic?
first of 2 pages of the expenses associated with each department.
Oh,
Revenue net expenses.
okay, so that's probably before.
Page
this.
14.
Yeah, this is 14.
General fund expense classification? Or
What,
budget?
is it this one or is it a different, is it by
That one right there.
classification? Okay,
Okay. So if we were to say, let's start cutting the budget, this is where we'd probably have to start. Am I right? By department?
You're not going to start with the coroner, that's for
12
sure.
and 13. Page,
We'll start at the top.
page 12
okay.
and 13. No, no.
So if we were to say, let's cut the sheriff's budget by 3 million. Let's cut the building department by 2 million. Let's cut the state's attorney's office by 750,000. The circuit clerk's office by $500,000. The judicial department by $500,000. IT by $500,000. And the county clerk by 250,000, just picking on the low hanging fruit, which are the big numbers. That's $7.5 million. That would cut the amount of reserves that would be needed almost in half. And if we're going to do a good job of coming up with a budget, it's time for us to start looking at reducing expenses. Why are we afraid to talk about it?
Sanchez has been wanting to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, again, the point was made earlier that during the conversations of the budget presentations at committee, that would have been where we should have been started talking about cutting. Maybe we can do something at this point, this 11th and a half hour. I think Madam Chair mentioned the sheriff understanding our pressure and finding ways to reduce his budget. And if we could get those other departments, especially with those big numbers there and change, if we could ask them to reduce as much as they can, that would be good. At this point, I just thinking of the process, how would we even go through this in the time we have to go through each of these and say, yes, this can be cut out, this cannot. Because some of those, like Mr. Leonard had made the point, well, let's get rid of all of the non-safety act personnel increases. Well, some of those have actually been passed by board resolution. So we would have to go back and undo those, like for building management, a lot of the restructuring happening there, we approved. So that's tricky. We would have to really get into the details, and some things maybe we could say we're not going to fund that extra position, but other things we cannot. But we'd have to go through resolution. So I just find the concept of trying to make cuts at the committee level at this point very tricky. I'm really curious what that specific process would be to make it clean and not become a total mess. I'm concerned that that's what it would be. Just saying, hey, let's take $500,000 here, $500,000 there. It just doesn't equal reality in my opinion. But I think the concept, the idea of trying to find cuts is key and should have been done much more thoroughly through this budgeting process. I don't see politically how we're going to get a CPI increase passed. I mean, just read the room, right? When you get all 24 of us in the room, I don't know that you're going to find that will, but out in the public, maybe you would, but out in the public, they see that we do have some reserve money. They don't understand all the details of what's going on here. And that big pie chart right over there, we got 2 of them. The public can't see, but that's the breakdown of where all of our property taxes go to. And that huge chunk going to schools is the reason we're having such stressful conversations about, do we increase taxes or not? If we didn't have that big piece of the pie going to schools. If the state were funding schools a little more better than, we are now and how they do it in other states, I wonder. We wouldn't have the pressure on us, because I do think financially, the prudent thing to do would be to raise the CPI along the way here and there, to be more watchful over the expense increases that are happening, be more on top of that. A sales tax, if we need it, is reasonable. But in this climate that we have, I just don't know how we can just come right out and say, this is our biggest strategy. Right now, we've got some money that we can put into this reserve money. Where can we make cuts? I don't know, but I don't see how we're going to go forward with tax increases at this point politically.
Well, Mr. Martin,
Mr. Sanchez, my point is that we can't use up these reserves. We cannot just go and allocate the reserves. We need to have a building fund. There are so many other things that we need. And if we are unable to say we don't have any sources of revenue, then we've got to go back and start cutting the budget, whether it's the 11th hour or 2 minutes before the 12th hour. We don't cut the budget, I think we're making a mistake.
I concur. I concur.
I
We
have
$8 million.
several hands up. I think Mr. Martin was first and then Mr. Sturgis.
If I could expand expand upon what Mr. Sanchez said.
Microphone.
This issue has been lying fallow before us for months as we've had these presentations. I can't, and I know from conversations had that there was thought given to these presentations as they were made. There are some departments that were very conservative on their things. There were some departments that were more generous in their computation of what they needed. But we need to remember that of the largest numbers that we're talking about here, at least 6 of them are elected officials with independent ability to determine their budget. We have limited ability to control that budget, and we certainly don't have arbitrary ability to say we're just simply going to cut this off. They have independent ability to come and sue us and enforce that. If there's a proposal for some specific modest things that make some sense that we feel we could respond to, I think we ought to do it. And I think at this meeting today, Jarrett said at the beginning, what's the goal of the meeting? I don't think it's productive today to spend a lot of time talking about how things could have been had we enacted the referendum, if we authorize a referendum, or whether we are going to raise our sales, our property tax. That's $2.5 million. We're going to have a shortfall come hell or high water. So at the end of the day, the committee says, yeah, let's recommend the 5%, and the board votes on it or they don't. But the main issue is that I don't think we've got a lot of flexibility here, and it insults the process to say that we're going to have this conversation at the 11th hour or at the 11:30th hour. We have an obligation to get this done. If there are some clear things that can be done, we do it, and I think we have to live with the fact that this is where we are today. We will have an excess at the end of this year by anybody's computation that gets applied against last year. If we have money, and Mavis, I understand what you're saying, but I think that my interpretation of the federal monies that we have is that one of our fiduciary obligations to our constituents is to make as much of that money available as is ethically and or legally possible to the support of the county, because if we don't, we're asking the taxpayers to make donations to 501c3 corporations and other things which they may or may not want to do. So I'm not saying it's a great deal. I think Mr. Leonard used the term, these are not good solutions, but they're solutions. But I think we've got to bring this to a head. And Vern, I understand what you're saying about us spending more than we've got, but I think we're tying our kite to a hurricane if we just simply say we're going to go and we're going to lop off arbitrary percentages of various offices.
Deal.
Surges.
Mr. Surges.
Well, this has certainly been a lively debate. I'm concerned when I hear things like kick the can down the road. I'm befuddled when I hear things such as we've mismanaged the county for quite some time now. That really puts me back on my heels a bit, to be honest with you. John, I agree with I agree with the notion that we need to, I apologize there, hang on a second. I agree with the notion that independent control is exhibited by the elected offices, but I disagree that there is only so much amount of money that's available. And we are at the point where it's time to simply go back to those offices and department heads and say, this is the reality. This is where we're at. We're not telling you where to cut, but we're asking you, where can you cut to get us back into a sustainable budget?
I think we've
And I don't think that's wrong to do. I don't think it's our job as board members to tell them where they need to cut, but it is our job to suggest this is all the money that's available. And we're telling you we've exhausted it. We're in the 11th hour. We need to bring down, whatever the figure is. And Vern, I just wanted to comment. I do believe that going to reserves to balance a budget is not the thing to do. But I also want to put out there that there's been several departments that have come forward and said, we'd like to try something on a trial basis. If we add a person or two here, we think that ultimately there will be a savings. I don't mind going to reserves for that. I think that's what they're there for, to try some new initiatives, to try and see if we can do something to change the way we manage and do business. And for those very minor, small amount of items, I don't mind doing that, dipping into the reserves, but not just to do a wholesale, balancing of the budget. So my point is, I think we're long overdue to get this back to the offices and department heads and say, this is the reality and this is where we're at, and you've got 2 weeks to respond back or 10 days to respond back. Where, can you get this in line for us to move forward? Thank you.
Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Chair had mentioned when I talked about not adding an additional 29 people to this budget and not giving equity increases, how terrible that would be on the morale of the employees in the county. Yet I believe you just proposed an $8 million cut to the county, and that would have to come out of pay and salary. And Mr. Temp, you did the same thing. My suggestion is if we do those two areas, don't add the 29 new additional spots. And if we don't give equity raises this year, because we can't afford to, not that we don't want to, we'll save 3 million. We bring it down to about 13.5 million. We have to pass this budget now because we've got to get going on it. We've waited 9 months to get to this point, and we need to do something. And then that way we're not asking department heads to do anything that to their existing people, except with respect to the equity raise. And that is something hopefully down the road we can look at, but quite honestly, we just can't afford that right now. So I'm not asking for an $8 million cut in the budget. I'm asking for a 3 million, and a 3 million that will not affect, truly won't affect most of the employees in the county.
I'm sorry, I'm going to just jump in. I don't mean to interrupt, please, my hand. You're denying potentially, we have an opportunity to bring in $2.5 million, this board does. I'm sure you have knocked doors. I've knocked doors. I've talked to people. We're talking about going from a property tax that it's 4% right now to 4.2%, 4.2%. We, at that suggestion of not allowing our hardworking, very considerate employees, most of whom are been here, some of them have been here for over 40 years, that kind of loyalty. 44 years, I think, is one of our longest employees. And denying them the opportunity to have an appropriate increase that would be metered out cautiously and judiciously between our department heads and our elected officials is short-sighted and mean. And I mean that sincerely. Now, you have brought up, Mr. Leonard, and I appreciate your fiscal prudence, that we couldn't raise or even consider having a countywide sales tax go out. And I'm not belaboring, I'm just using it as an example because of the cost of gasoline. I have brought up the fact that a average 2-bedroom apartment here in Kane County is hovering anywhere from $1,800 to $2,000. And yet we're just saying to our individuals who probably could earn significantly more at other counties, that we're denying them the opportunity to make a decent living here because we are afraid to put that tax increase that would help pay for that. That just doesn't seem right to me at all. It just doesn't sit right with me. So I think that we ought to carefully consider that 900,000 over 3 years, bringing it up to 2.7 and budget accordingly with that.
Mr. Shepro?
I have a question for Mr. Surgis or maybe for Ms. Lobrillo. There seems to be, or overhanging this is the premise that we have to do the equity adjustment because people are leaving in droves. But my understanding is that the numbers don't actually demonstrate that. And I wondered if either Cliff or Jamie could respond to that.
Annie?
I do have some numbers relating to retention. Just as a disclaimer on these, because we don't have a fixed position model, it's difficult to assess when they are leaving in a position and then when that same position has been rehired or a different position has been created. But generally speaking, you're looking straight up at terminations within the county. That has increased over the years. There's been a number of factors that determine that as we have gone into the pandemic, but just some general numbers. If you're looking at attrition rates, which would be the annual average retention rate, is separations as a percentage of annual average employment. So in 2018, that number was 15.1%. In 2019, that number was 12.8%. It was 12.8% again in 2020. In 21, it was 17%. And in 2022, so far, it is 19.5%.
Thank you.
And how does that compare to information that we know of from other counties? I mean, are we, much worse than other counties? Are we better? Are we in the middle?
I think from my experience, and those are conversational with human resources people in surrounding counties, it seems to be consistent with the surrounding counties.
Mr. Chair, Surgis here.
Mr. Martin first.
I just wanted to respond to Shepro.
All right, Mr. Surgis.
Yeah, Ken, Jamie and I have been monitoring this and reporting through committee that, 15%, 17%, 19, 12, whatever the case may be, is consistent with the industry. Comparing us to other counties, we are not, our attrition rate is not worse than, it is not, there's not a house on fire with people running out of it. We are very consistent. Some of the problem, I think, conversationally that we have is when we lose a county employee to a private job, it's very difficult for us to go apples to apples. So a person who might be doing, one thing, oranges at the county, goes to work for Apple's in the private sector, making considerably more. Well, I mean, that's really tough to compare because they're not doing the same job. And that becomes a difficult conversation to try and quantify. So we do look at this by and large, roll to roll, county to county, and we are very stable, at least from my perspective. And again, you know, if Ms. Labrillo feels that I'm inaccurate there, please feel free to jump in, but I do want to report that.
Mr. Martin.
And I know I'm being repetitive here. This is October. To suggest that we can somehow conduct a negotiation with our department heads and our elected officials to save $8 million between now and then is, to me, beyond a fiction.
Yes.
We have a situation where we're sitting in a, you know, to be trite, we're sitting in a restaurant, we looked at the menu and we don't have enough money. Now, we have reserves and we have an obligation, and the obligation is to begin to deal with this. And as I said before, there's a deficit here, whether we raise the taxes or not. We can support the tax increase. We can vote as a board to do it. And that's a $2.5 million question. What we're trying to do is to figure out how to deal with $16 million, and 2.5 is not the issue. To suggest that we can somehow find $8 million that is not related to salaries or to cutting to the quick in employees, I think is a fiction. We simply don't have that latitude. We can't turn the lights off. We can't not heat the buildings. We can't quit plowing the roads. We don't have $8 million in a dream here without hitting employees. And if you want to demoralize employees, start firing them, because that's what we'd have to do to come up with $8 million. We can argue the philosophy of how well the board should have operated over the last 10 years. We can say, when should we have started raising taxes again? We can do all that stuff. But at the end of 2022, we sit here with a budget that we've got to make a best effort at concluding and resolving. And the mere thought of sending a letter to elected officials saying, can you come back with some better ideas? I think we've done that. I have heard complaints to the fact that people have come back 3 and 4 times explaining what their budget is, and that's where it is. So to believe that we're going to sit down and say, can we do this and get it done, is beyond my comprehension. I'm grasping at straws here. Early in the meeting, I think Mr. Leonard said he had a suggestion. Let's start with something solid and not a wish list of, gosh, I hope we can get elected officials to ask for less money, and get something on the table and get it done. As blunt as that sounds, the options are not all that grand. And the only issue to me as we sit here for this is the board going to vote in favor of raising the property tax or not? And that to me is, you know, you present 2 budgets, one that's got a 5% tax increase on it and one that doesn't. And there's a motion and somebody moves to approve with one or the other, and it either passes or it fails.
Yep.
And that's, to me, the
Aye.
choice.
Mr. Leonard.
Yes, you know, I would agree with Mr. Martin in the fact that, number one, we have to get a budget together and propose it to the finance committee this Friday to get it at the county board next week. And I think, you know, what we have to do is not look at talking to 13 different departments and asking them to cut their budget by $1 million or $2 million or $3 million, as has been suggested. But I think what we need to do is take a look at how we can get this budget to a reasonable point, maybe 13, 14 million, present that to the finance committee, let them decide whether or not they like it. And then if that is moved forward, then let the board vote on it with the caveat that we also vote on a property tax increase. I have no problem with the board voting on that. In fact, I think it's a responsibility of this board to vote whether to approve a property tax increase or not, and to do it with the current board. So I would like to propose two things. Number one, that we come to some sort of an agreement on what we are going to propose on Friday to the finance committee for their approval, and that we put not only a budget on the agenda for next Tuesday, but also a vote on the property tax. I have no problem with the vote on both of those, and I think we owe it to the public and to this board, and actually to the future board, to take care of this while we're in office.
So just a correction to the timeline, not to what you're saying. On Monday, we will be having a meeting of the executive committee. And then the board will meet as proposed without this discussion. There will be a special board meeting several days later just to hone in on this. And then that'll be passed one way or the other so that it can be brought forward. So it'll be the finance committee, then the executive committee will be meeting, and then we'll have a meeting of the full board.
Monday, I think, is.
No, it's
You have it on-
It's a holiday.
Tuesday. I'm sorry, Tuesday. I'm getting all my dates.
Tuesday's the board meeting. The executive committee meets tomorrow, do they
Yeah,
not?
tomorrow.
You're talking about a special executive.
Special.
Well,
all
you're
of
going to
these
have
will
an
be
executive
special.
meeting though tomorrow.
Special
Correct, but
executive
this is
meeting?
not to be discussed at that time because this is still, has to be passed by the finance committee. Then it has to go to executive committee, and then it's got to go to the full board.
Well, when is the executive committee going to meet?
It's next week.
Well, you've got a board meeting scheduled for Thursday.
That has been shifted to executive. And then the following Monday, week from,
That's different than this morning.
yes, it just changed. It just changed, sir.
So we need.
It was
notice.
brought to my attention that I thought it had to go directly from finance to the full board, but it was brought to my attention that it does have to be passed through exec. So that's why.
Could you have a combined meeting or both meetings, finance and executive at the same time?
I'm not aware of that. We'll have to
I
ask
mean, you could, I guess, is.
Michelle Neerman, if that's allowed.
So this is not on the calendar yet?
Yes, it is.
It's being changed. though.
It was just changed.
I mean,
And we still can meet the criteria as originally set forth. This is going back to the original schedule that we all agreed upon on, I actually have the date for that. That was set in June for the timing of presenting and approving the budget. So we're completely on track.
what did we agree on in June? Can you refresh
We're going
my?
to pass a balanced budget.
Well,
I'm sorry, but can we have the dates again? Because I did not see that this morning. The executive committee is now next Thursday, the 13th.
Has that been changed?
Savannah, could you get those dates for us? Do you have them?
special executive.
We've got.
Special executive
We've
is,
got a lot, we've got a couple of special meetings. So Savannah will bring up all the dates for us.
So the special finance committee is going to be October 7th at 2:30 PM.
That's here.
The next is going to be the special executive committee. That's going to be October 13th at 10:30 AM. And then the following week, Monday, October 17th, that will be the special county board. And that one is going to be at 9:30 AM.
October 17th is a county board meeting.
And you'll send that out to us.
Well, how about,
Yes.
we have a scheduled a county board meeting on the 11th? Is our normal county board meeting?
Correct.
It's Tuesday.
We will still have that?
Yes, yes. There's business to be taken care of.
And executive tomorrow.
That's accurate.
Mr. Chairman, dates, please.
It's-
What I hear as a consensus of this committee is that no matter what, we're going to have to take out of reserves,
Oh, yeah,
correct?
Absolutely.
So I think that might be the catalyst that can get us all to agree that reserves is the way we have to go. And I believe at this 11.75 hour, that might be the best course of action. Let's admit we have to take it out of reserves and go start the 2024 process day after tomorrow or whenever we get this settled, and do the best we can to cut our expenses and increase our revenues. There's no other math going on here. Cut expenses, increase revenues, and take it out of the reserves for this point in time. And yes, Mr. Tepe, this is kicking the can down the road. But when you're already on the road and you're already kicking the can, I don't think we have much of a choice here.
You have,
So,
you have a,
and I believe that's where we all agree and where we can get our consensus.
I'm trying to breathe.
There is another, I think that, as Mr. Hansick said, there were basically two ways to do it. The first one he presented was with an increase in our property tax and reserve, and the other was all reserve. And I think, as Mr. Leonard said, there's no reason why the board should not take action on our opportunity to take advantage of the tax increase. But that's, I think how we present that, whether we present both budgets and we vote on one or the other or what. In my research in the past week, I determined that majority of taxing bodies in the P-tail area take advantage of that increment every year. And that includes our school districts, who the percentage they take, as you see this sign over here, 68%. So what the school district gets out of that increase every year is a heck of a lot more than the 2.5 million we're asking for, or the $7 to $33 we're asking each homeowner to pay. So that to me is, the significant thing. Everyone's taken advantage of that. We haven't taken advantage of it in 10 years and 11.
What happened?
Yeah, okay, that's my point. Mr. Leonard.
Mr. Chairman, I think what you're suggesting, and if I'm putting words in your mouth, please let me know, but are you suggesting that we vote on the property tax increase at the Tuesday county board meeting? And then once we know the decision on that, we can then decide how much we need in reserve to balance our budget, which we'll do right after the county board meeting and before the special county board meeting.
The budget is really both income and expense.
Why not?
It has to go through the finance committee meeting, and then it has to go to an executive committee meeting to approve this. So we can have all members of the board attend the October 7th finance committee meeting and do a straw poll on that. Then on October 13th, we have the executive committee, which also has to support the decision, the recommendation of this ad hoc committee. Once this committee makes its recommendation, we're done.
We don't have to go through executive for this, I don't believe.
Suspend.
According to the.
It is according to the state's attorney. She said that is in our county code.
Ms. Newman.
Well, you can vote to suspend the rules of order. I believe, and I believe you could also vote to bypass the process. I mean, you can't let the process drag you down to the bottom of the ocean.
Well, we're not, but this is not dragging us down into the bottom of the ocean. This is pretty timely, but let Michelle Neerman speak.
Section 248 of the King County Code contemplates that the Finance Committee will make a recommendation that gets passed on to the Executive Committee. The Executive Committee then has jurisdiction over all matters relating to the county budget for each fiscal year and shall annually prepare and submit to the county board an estimate of receipts, revenues, and expenditures required in any fiscal year in accordance with the terms and provisions of statute pertaining thereto. And shall authorize and direct that the county finance director provide and deliver to each member of the county board a copy of said proposed annual budget and appropriation ordinance at the meeting of the county board at which the annual budget and appropriation ordinance is presented to said board. And the budget and appropriation ordinance shall be made conveniently available for public inspection for at least 15 days prior to final action thereon by the county board. The executive committee shall also have jurisdiction over the preparation of the annual tax levy for consideration and enactment by the county board in conformance with the statutes of the state.
Could you put that on a bumper sticker, please?
And so
It's gotta go, it's gotta go through exec. It's gotta go through exec.
Is our 15
For the
day
question for the state's attorney?
What about our 15-day review period?
And that is the 15-day review period. You'll come back for a final vote and that'll be on the 7th, November 7th. It has been displayed for 2 weeks.
15 days.
Correct.
Then on November 7th.
You may actually will
Final
take
vote.
the vote to approve or disapprove the budget.
Well,
And that again, I'm going to go back to what the original timeline was. It meets it.
Well,
now a question for the state's attorney, Mr. Chairman, Shepro.
bro.
All right. Given 248, that would not preclude there being a special meeting, say, of finance at 9 o'clock and a special meeting of the executive committee at 9:30.
That's correct.
As long as they met the notice requirements. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. Yes, yes.
Right, you would just, we would have to be careful with how the agenda is worded for the county, under the Open Meetings Act.
I guess the point is that it doesn't seem to me that we have to drag that out over a 2-week period. And I agree with Ms. Bates's observations. I mean, if we're just trying to satisfy a procedural requirement, I don't think we should let the process be extended out by deadlines that we can legally and I think usefully compress. And back to sort of the very first question that Mr. Sanchez asked some hours ago, what is the mission of this committee at this point? Is it going to make a recommendation? Is it going to kick even that can down the road? And there's reference made to, which I think we're now being told isn't true, that there needed to be a recommendation to the finance committee by Friday.
Oh, no, that's the scheduled meeting of the finance committee.
Right, so is
that
this?
true? That is
Yeah,
true.
so this committee sometime between now and whenever needs to then make that recommendation. And while I've heard some good suggestions, nobody has yet put it in the form of a motion. And I would strongly suggest that somebody ought to do that.
Mr. Martin, excuse me, Mr. Leonard.
Thank you for the nice comparison. I know that's a compliment to myself, but Mr. Martin doesn't look too happy about it. Just a joke. I just wanted to make a motion that we decide today or sometime before our Friday meeting with the Finance Committee on a budget, realizing, as Ms. Bates said, that we're going to have to use reserves to balance the budget. We don't know exactly how much the reserves will be. And once again, that will be dependent upon whether or not the property tax increase is approved or not. But I move that we present a budget to the Finance Council for their approval on Friday with the understanding that the reserves will not be known until we vote on the property tax increase.
Sorry, can you state that last sentence again or have it, maybe Savannah can repeat it? Can you repeat Mr. Leonard's, especially the last sentence? I was unclear. I understand property tax and reserves, but are we going to propose a?
I have decide on a budget, realizing they have to use reserves to balance the budget, dependent on if the property tax increase passes or not.
But I think it's going to be,
The amounts you kind of.
so it's either going to be
Maybe too
14
vague.
or 16 million. of reserves, 14 million or 16 million approximately.
Right.
Yeah.
It's fine.
We won't have the total agreement on the property tax until the full board meets.
Right. So that could amend it.
May I make a suggestion on wording?
Yes, please.
All right.
Along with what Mr. Berman suggested, I would suggest that perhaps the motion should be to move forward two alternative budget proposals. One without a 5% property tax increase, and alternative 1 or 2, whichever you choose, is with the 2.5%. And that recommendation be forwarded to the Finance Committee by appropriate motion today. Is that what you had in mind, Mr. Chairman?
You mean 2.5 million?
I-
Five, yeah.
$500,000.
2.5 million.
Mr. Onset, could you bring up slide number 25 of your? I believe these are the two alternatives that you're referring to.
Yes, they exactly are.
Option 1, option 2, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's,
Is this what you meant to say, Mr. Leonard?
Yes.
yes.
That's it.
That's
That's it,
exactly right.
exactly it.
Just worded a little bit differently.
So I think the question then is, do you want option 1 or option 2?
Or forwarding both as alternatives.
I think we have to offer both.
I believe Mr. Leonard's motion was to forward both options to the board with the board to decide on the property tax increase.
The finance committee, to the finance.
The finance committee.
It's got to be, we're going to vote, you're going to vote on either 1 or 2, because we're going to have one vote.
Yes.
But we can vote on both, and then what, if the property taxes are passed, that one is in effect. And if it isn't passed, the other one is in effect.
Why don't we vote on 1 and then they can have the option for number 2?
Let's just have that first, please.
I think this is very similar to what we did last year. Some of you might recall it's very circuitous. We had about 8 different options and we had to go through them in order because depending on what happened with the first,
Yeah.
it could affect what happens following. So yeah, it makes sense having 2 parallel budgets, one that contemplates the CPI increase, one that does not. Use the reserves for whatever is remaining, but also I think it's important that, and this is more on our end politically, is to encourage department heads and elected officials to reduce their budget where possible. We don't have time to get into the weeds with them and kind of, stake some corners out and put pressure on. So if we can just all nudge as friendly as we can, in most friendly way to reduce their, as Mr. Hain apparently is doing. Madam Chair mentioned Mr. Hain is already looking at ways. So that's great. That'll reduce the amount of reserves, but otherwise this seems a very simple concept, very, very easy. And
The
Actual concept is the same.
It would seem to be, along with what Jared said, if we present the 5% increase, and if that fails, then we present the 0% increase.
option A would be the
And,
increase.
but here's my question. I keep going back to the fact that Mr. Leonard also mentioned that if we did not improve new hires, we've got another $3 million. I think this committee should decide whether they want to consider that as part of the recommendation.
If I may, one of the things that a budget will allow you to do is to present new programs, new opportunity. And Mavis, I'm not picking on you, but so I was thinking about this. We had moved forward with a solar field. And with that solar field, there was a recommendation that we had to have some landscaping. Because the neighbors wanted some landscaping. Now, if we had never wanted a solar field, everything would remain exactly the same, right? The trees would be there and the grasses and whatever. But that's no longer the case. So we just approved about $50,000 for trees. And then the maintenance of those trees that have to take place. They have to be watered, et cetera. if we had never approved the solar field, which we all approved of, we would not have to spend the 50,000. Now, granted that that may pay in the long run, but in the same analogy, we had just approved 3 new positions for code enforcement within the county. The reason why we approved that for building maintenance or for development is so that codes would be properly enforced to maintain that there's a safety and integrity to our buildings, et cetera. And if they're not enforced, that would basically pay for itself, but that's an additional cost. So if we're going to freeze new opportunities, that would be a real significant way of saving money because we don't do anything new. Everything remains in place.
I wasn't negotiating so much as to say it had been raised as a point, and I wanted to make sure when this committee left the room today that they'd addressed all of the.
I understand that, but things come as a natural.
I think your point is well taken.
You don't remotely have the time to engage in that analysis to get something to the finance committee on Friday.
Oh, no,
We have to
absolutely
put
not.
We can always amend it down the road.
But the other thing that I want to caution everybody with, and this was something that Mr. Onzig brought up today, and he's another item that was not discussed today that we have to be aware of, as well as our own policy. We have no choice. Reserves are going to be used. We're all in agreement with that. There's absolutely no choice with that. But this is money that is it's a fund that we've got approximately $29 million in. Now we're taking 16, perhaps 14 or $16 million out of that fund, which gives us half of that fund. And then next year, if a property tax is not increased or we don't have a sales tax, we're going to have real structural deficits with that. The other thing I want to caution is that the bond rating, we can't go out to bond anymore because we don't have enough revenue, incoming revenue, to pay for our expenses. So
Remember the 16 million, we were going to take 16 million to cover last year's deficit. And when all the numbers came in, it turned out to be a couple $100,000. So
But hold on a second, that was done simply because of the budgeting that happened. That number has been changed and is already included in, that was sales tax.
No, we've got an audit from this year that we'll get next March that will equate to $13 to $15 million.
Is that true, Mr. Onzig?
Yes, that's what the forecast had shown. Yes,
And is that money already included in this year's budget,
absolutely. Yes.
which was not the case last year?
I know, but we're getting an additional 13 million.
But it's already in the, but I believe it's already in
What we
this
did is
budget.
we increase it, so the next year the audit won't be big. This year's audit will still be 13 to 15 million. The 22 budget. audit.
Yes, so I think there's like 2 things being spoken of at the same time. I did increase the budgeted revenue for FY23 in accordance with what we're already forecasting to have increase for 2022. So that part's done. But then the 13 million that'll be coming in, I've already added it into
Revenues.
where's that slide? Oops.
Up to the
How's it going?
105 million.
No, I'm sorry. I can't find that slide. Okay. That 29 million already includes that extra 13 million that's coming back in.
So it's already in the
Because
budget.
that 6 million in property tax freeze and that 22 million in COVID, we drew down from those funds to balance this year's budget. And I put it back because I know that it's coming back as in terms of our forecast. So that's already included in here. So we're not going to have an additional, increase to the reserves. But what's not included in here would be additional COVID payroll reimbursement. And if there's any, so that would further increase the 29 million, but we won't know what that figure is until we close the year.
You have
But-
an estimate on that?
Well, it could be as much as 10 million, but that's assuming that the sheriff continues to have used his personnel to substantially mitigate COVID. And I don't know if that's still the case. That was projected to be the case. That's where the 10 million came from. But it may not in actuality turn out to be the case. And especially if they don't have, if there's vacancies involved, because then you can't reimburse yourselves for expense you never incurred.
So $10 million is not by any means a.
It's not an
fixed.
accurate
It's
number.
it's not accurate.
Right. It's
That's the pie in the sky number,
Exactly.
because I believe Mr. Sanchez has, I've had this conversation, the sheriff is not still using COVID people. He's not using his people for COVID related purposes.
That I have not heard that myself. but-
I can just speak very briefly to the payroll aspect. For this last year, we were only able to recoup about 50% of the expenses compared to 100%. And we don't know for this year what that percentage is going to be. Even if it stays at 50%, it's still, there's going to be a large reduction in COVID related personnel expenses. So that $10 million, my biggest number in my guess would be 5 million. With revenue recoupment, something we'll be talking about at the next ARPA meeting. It's likely we'll only see another $6 million coming from that. That could be applied in this manner.
Because
Yeah, so maybe about 10 million altogether that would.
the economy has
come from
recovered.
that.
The economy's
We do have a motion.
For a second,
We need a second.
You need a second.
the payroll
can we have a repeat of the motion?
35.
Oh, God.
No.
Yes, would you mind, please?
No, you're right. Then it stays. So if I may, the next year, whatever we do for this year, we have to do, and the board has to decide, and the new board can't judge the county's projected budget on what occurs in the state of Illinois, can't blend us and say all taxes in Kane County, which is, we've seen in local papers that are being delivered to our mail, that we have the highest tax, local tax in the Midwest. Because we only have 4%. It's 4 cents on a dollar. Look at the whole 100%, it's 4 cents on a dollar. What we're asking potentially is 4.2 cents on the dollar. It's after 10 years, that's less than a half a cent a year we're asking for.
Do we have the motion?
Yes, we have a motion. I'd like it reread so that we can confirm it.
I believe the motion is forwarding the two proposed budget options, one with the 5% property increase, one without, to the finance committee.
That's correct.
Which shouldn't say 5%. Shouldn't it say COLA, cost of living?
Well, the most we can do is 5%.
5% COLA, yeah, yeah.
More accurate.
Mm.
We have a second.
I'll second it.
Stephanie will second that. Discussion?
Oh, I think we should have a lot of this.
More discussion.
Does there need to be mention of use of reserves?
The
or no?
last 2 hours of the discussion.
It's implied, yeah.
Go back
right.
to option 1 and option 2, please.
As
What is with the property tax increase?
The Surgeons, are you still there?
Probably on mute.
You couldn't peel me away from this meeting.
I just want to do it with my own.
We have a roll call on that?
Right.
I can't.
Bates,
Bates, yes.
Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Pepe,
Seppi, yes.
Sturgis,
Sturgis, yes.
Pirog,
He didn't vote.
Berman.
Yes.
Berman, yes.
I know, it was in his email today.
Old business.
I can.
Have none.
got really
We have to
old.
go into executive session.
Not reports placed on file. I don't know if we have any reports, do we?
You've got Mr. Isaac's report.
Yes, unanimous,
Oh.
motion of unanimous consent to place reports on file.
I'm sorry.
This one.
Unanimous consent. Anybody against that?
Not on the
Very good.
agenda.
We have unanimous consent. We need someone to make it a motion to adjourn.
May I?
Leonard
have a comment,
moves.
please?
Deputy seconds.
I have a comment.
Hang on.
I would like to ask Mr. Anzick, and I hope this isn't cruel and unusual punishment, but I studied this hard last night and I studied the wrong thing because we received this at 4:30 in the morning. I wish we weren't doing this to you. If we could get this at least a day or two ahead of time, so I could have had a chance to study, do the right homework instead of the wrong homework, it would,
We see
it
what
would
happens.
be a blessing.
I agree. I get the changes. I'm trying to give you the most up-to-date information that I have so that you're working with the latest, but
Well, I'm sorry you were up till 4:32 in the morning. And, but this would have helped me to have it yesterday to study. So
Thank you, Joe, for all your work.
Yes.
Got to clone Joe.
I'd like to move that we adjourn.
two of you.